Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, I heard very clearly from the member for Daly that we haven't been out there consulting with people about this. And I also picked up from the member for Arafura, who also talked about consultation. Well, let me tell you, Madam Speaker, I put in the press release about police public safety officers model in planning in my July newsletter. I delivered that newsletter, hand-delivered it, across the whole electorate. They read it. They came back and gave me feedback. And let's just look at a couple of elements of what it said. It said, heading was Police Public Safety Officer Model and Planning. The Whanokī-Aro government is embarking on significant law and order reform to target antisocial behaviour in public places as part of our year of action, certainty and security. It also went on to say, aimed at reducing crime and restoring the Territory lifestyle, the Government and Northern Territory Police Force are developing a new Police Public Safety Officer stream to better deploy frontline resources across key public spaces. And it also went on to say it would cover transit officers, it would definitely cover public housing officers, which is really relevant to my electorate. And finally, and can I have leave to maybe just table that page too, please?
Is leave granted to the member? Or those in favour say aye, to the contrary no. Leave is granted. And
so it went on and it went through the description of all this. But let me tell you what the last paragraph said. A structured change management process will support affected staff and guide the transition. The first intake of police public safety officers is expected to commence training in December 2025 and officers operation in early 2026. That was the time frame we've told the community about. Now let me tell you, I have had many people come up to me in my electorate and say, we need this, but Brian, we need it quicker. You're not doing it quick enough. They would like it this week. They probably want it last week if they could have the chance. But you do have to go through a process. They do have to go through a process. And this is just some enabling legislation to just start the process to get the descriptions finalised and the positions created so that then we can go on with getting the powers and all those sorted out and then getting the recruitment process going. You need to get this started. And I don't think my electorate want us to sit back and say, oh no, let's lay this on the table for another 30 days. Let's go to a scrutiny committee. They want it. They don't want to hold back on this. They know that this is what they want. And sure, we can debate the details when the further legislation comes through, that's fine. But they do want this happening. It's a change they've been demanding and they are very conscious. So I understand normal concerns around urgency, but I hear this bit about, 8 pieces of legislation. Do not forget that early legislation we brought in was in our plan, as the Deputy Chief Minister said. We said week 1 of Parliament and we did all the stuff about bail reform. We went to the election on that. We consulted with the whole of the Territory. They wanted us to deliver on what we said, and that's what we did. And likewise, this, I think, is really urgent for my electorate. They really do want it, and I commend the bill.
Honourable Member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it is a privilege to speak this morning in support of the Police Administration Amendment Public Safety Officer Bill 2025. And can I say that I also echo the sentiments expressed by the member for Drysdale. They were very similar in my electorate to what he has. And like him, I'm very proud to be part of this united government team that has taken great steps to reduce crime, rebuild our economy and restore our lifestyle over the last 12 months. And let me reiterate that whilst we have taken some great steps, we all acknowledge that there is much more work to be done. And this is not a time for complacency, but rather the opportunity to build on the growing confidence and optimism of Territorians to make a better future for all. And let me talk more broadly about that growing confidence and optimism within our community, because the introduction of this bill is an important part of our overall strategy to get the Territory back on track and especially links to our commitments to reduce crime and restore our lifestyle. As mentioned previously, I base my judgments on the direct feedback I get from my electorate of Karama, a community I am privileged to serve. And I don't know where the opposition go, but I certainly connect with my community. I consult with them. And as I've said before, I've just gone out with my newsletter where I publicly listed the description of what we're going to do with public safety officers. And the feedback from that community is do it quicker. So when people say, have you consulted? I have. I don't know how many of the opposition went out and consulted with their community, but I certainly did. So, Madam Speaker, talking about optimism and confidence, I fondly recall on Sunday, straight after the election, walking around the Karama shops, being approached by many residents and local business people expressing their heartfelt thanks that the new CLP government had been elected and hopeful that we would get the Territory back on track. Some openly stated then that they had been planning to leave the Territory, but because we'd got elected, they decided to stay. Now, 12 months on, as I said, I stay very connected with my community, and whilst we still have important issues to address, including public housing reform, which I've talked about before, and I know my other colleagues, and we're working on that, the majority of my constituents confirm that they do feel more confident and optimistic than they did some 12 months ago. And just on Saturday evening, I had the chance to address local residents at the final Malac Community Markets, of which I'm a major sponsor. I was joined by my Northern Suburbs colleagues and also the member for Port Darwin, and I'll talk more about that and acknowledge the volunteers in an adjournment speech. But it's worth noting that we also have one of the leading business people in Malac get up and address the audience. Now, in addition to thanking all the volunteers, he took the opportunity to publicly congratulate the CLP government on the work taken to grow the Territory and openly acknowledge the positive growth in optimism and confidence over the last 12 months. And he has seen the local business sector and in the wider community, they feel a lot safer. That was one of the comments too. They're feeling safer. And he received strong applause from the audience. Now, that was unprompted by any one of us, but that was the feedback that we're getting from the community. So don't say we don't consult with the community. We do. And I also got similar feedback when I was at the Cyprus Food and Wine Festival later that night. I was in the queue trying to get a souvlaki. People came up and said, you guys are doing a great job, but keep going, hold the course. Don't get distracted by the bleatings of Labor and others. Get on with it, you're doing a good job, but there's a long way to go, and I agree with them. So, Madam Speaker, as I said, I take great comfort in that. But I've heard the Leader of the Opposition, and I've heard Member for Johnson and all that. Their doom and gloom rantings, you know, about what we're doing and what we're going to do. So it made me reflect. What was the alternative scenario that could have happened 12 months ago? And the nightmare result could have been that we would have had a Labor-Greens independent coalition. Now just think of that. This is the alternative, going back. Well, Madam Speaker, imagine if we had to suffer such a government. We would have had a government of instability and inertia. I say again, a government of instability and inertia. Move over Freddie Kruger. Just imagine who would have been Chief Minister within 12 months of this nightmare coalition. Well, Madam Speaker, I predict we would have been already up to our third Chief Minister. That's where they would have got to. We've got stability. They would have been all over fighting. Member for Gwodge would be looking to get in there. Whoever, if Eva Lawler got there, they would have dumped her and it would have been all over the place. Yeah, they had a nice little reshuffle too. And as I said, it would have been a government of instability. But here, we've got to think a little bit further. Could you imagine what would have happened if the Greens and Independents manipulated this shambolic government with, let's say, the member for Johnson as Minister for Corrections and Police? Think of that. Think of that. Well, under this scenario, I don't know, in terms of corrections, we would not have more than 600 offenders off the streets, right? You wouldn't have had it, or behind bars. And we wouldn't have had genuine bail laws designed to protect our community. No, in contrast, we probably would have had even more offenders released on bail, ready to offend the next day with no consequences for behaviour. That's what we would have been faced with. And sure, they would have said, oh, our prison numbers are low. That's because they're all out on the streets. And the community would not have felt safer. Now, thankfully, Madam Speaker, the community wasn't going to go down this nightmare path, and they voted for us. And they wanted a government that listened to them, heard their concerns, and was willing to act on their behalf. They wanted a government that had a clear plan to reduce crime, rebuild the economy and restore lifestyle. But not just a plan, but willing to deliver on that plan. And we had a plan, and we're delivering on it. And some of those things had to be done on urgency because we already foreshadowed that's what we'd do. And that's what the people wanted us for. So I then hear the Leader of the Opposition going back to Crocs in the Cabinet, that book, Crocs in the Cabinet. Now, she may forget, I actually mentioned this in my maiden speech, Madam Speaker. And I said, yes, it was a shame. There was a bit of shambolic government there. But the pity was that the Gunner, Files, Lawler government, instead of just learning from that, they took it as a manual of operation. That became the way of how they operate. It was their guidance of how to do it. Now, I don't know where this government's been. They seem to forget this. And they talk about legislation. Oh, we did 32 pieces of legislation. Well, none of that was scrutinised because they didn't have a scrutiny committee. So, you come off at us. And could you imagine that shambolic Labor government with the Greens that we might have had? Labor probably would have held sway and said, no, we won't have a scrutiny committee. So we would have come on in this term and still have no scrutiny committee. There would have been nothing to bleat about because it wasn't there. So don't come off at us. We're the only ones that actually introduce it. We're pushing it along. And I'm just getting really worried about this opposition. They don't seem to listen to the real community, which I do, which I know all our members do. I know the member for Drysdale do. I know the member for Blaine and all the others. We do know that we need public housing safety officers with police powers. This is a welcome development in our community. We need to address some of those issues in public housing against the extreme vandalism we get. The antisocial behaviour 25 times a night every month. That's what the community wants us to address. This allows us, they're not using them. It's a bit like saying the police are going to interfere with every citizen. They're not. If you don't do the crime, you won't be impacted at all. This is only because of the bad behaviour. We are addressing that. And we actually put the community, the neighbours first and foremost. So this particular Labor caucus now, I don't know where they caucus. I think they caucus under the shade structure because they're obviously getting a bit sunstruck and their memory's going. They can't quite remember all the shambolic activities they did. And they keep coming at us about scrutiny. They did no scrutiny at all. And as I said, if they'd actually got in, they probably wouldn't have reintroduced it. The Greens may have pushed for it and Independents may have pushed for it, but I think given the makeup, they would have said, oh, no, we can't have that. Can't let the CLP come at us. We need to just sort of park that to the side. And they would have done all their shenanigans. Believe me, we have been open and honest. We came with a plan and we said, we do need to put these bail laws through on urgency, and we will, and we're committed to doing it. So we've stayed true to what we've told the community. And when you talk about an election, I'll give you a bit of advice on election. The electorate will come back and say, now, do we pick a government where they actually told us what they were going to do and they did it? Now, we may not have agreed with everything, but give them credit. They told us what they were going to do and they've done it. Or would you pick a Labor government and say, oh, no, you can't do that. Look, nothing's happened. They're not for all the Territorians. You can't do. What do you mean we're not for all the Territorians? We're for most of them because they actually voted for us. So when you say deliver legislation for all, what about all the people who voted for us? You're just ignoring them. You're neglecting them. And they will remember that neglect. and it continues on. I really wish we had a constructive opposition, one that did hold us to account properly. That's okay, and get in and discuss the bills as we do. But don't go off at us for delivering on what we promised to the community, because I actually hold that to my heart. I'm very proud of it, and I'm really proud of our whole government and our whole team. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.